Today we are we're wrapping up a series called Broken Patterns. And we're looking at patterns of thinking, specifically unhealthy and often unaddressed patterns of thinking. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, this might be getting old by now, but if you're new, there's something we've been talking about called the Tetris effect. Now, the Tetris effect came from this experiment that was done and actually replicated a few times where people had to play Tetris for hours at a time. And when they finished, they went out into the real world and found themselves playing Tetris with like everyday objects on accident. Like if you don't know Tetris, shapes fall from the sky and you gotta fit them in gaps. And they found themselves doing that with like cars in the road, books on a shelf, just like naturally doing it. And what they walked away with from that experiment was that, and you probably know this already, what we do intentionally for long enough, eventually we do automatically. And this isn't just true with Tetris, it's true with just about anything that you do for long enough intentionally. So if you're a designer, right, and you're constantly intentionally designing rooms, when you walk into a room, you probably notice how it's designed automatically. If you're a doctor, I bet you could pick up automatically when someone isn't feeling great or when they don't look right. Or if you're a physical therapist, maybe you can pick up when someone's walking with a limp in a way other people can't. This is all the Tetris effect. Not too long ago, I was riding a motorcycle around my house, and not like in the house, but around the place where I live. And I came to this stop sign, and there was a guy in his driveway, like fixing his car. And as I approach his driveway, he comes out, like gets in the road, stops me, and he goes, "If you keep riding like that, you're gonna burn out the clutch." And I like looked at him and I learned two things. One, I don't really know how to ride a motorcycle. And two, this is an example of the Tetris effect. The guy who's working on his car is probably some kind of mechanic. He's learned to listen to when something sounds the way that it should, and he picked up on it right away. Now, the Tetris effect can work for you or against you. It can make you someone who's naturally grateful, naturally appreciative, naturally selfless, right? Like because you do it intentionally and eventually you begin to do it automatically, or it can develop into some unhealthy patterns of thinking, like cynicism, we said, which is the tendency to see the worst in people, to assume the worst in people, to believe the worst in people. Like complaining, which is the tendency to see the worst in the situation. If you've been doing our 21-day complain-free challenge, stick with it. We talked about worry last week, which is the tendency to see the worst in the future. These are all patterns of thinking, patterns that can be broken. In fact, we said, and this matters especially if you're a person of faith or considering becoming one, the Apostle Paul, who was a follower of Jesus, came after Jesus. He said that basically the whole idea of following Jesus begins with transformation in the mind, not in what you do, but in actually how you think. Here's how he said it. He said, "Don't conform to the pattern of this world, what everyone else is doing, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Adopt new patterns of thinking. Break the old ones. And so this week we're talking about our last pattern of thinking. But instead of just telling you what it is, I want to show you a little video. We made this 2 years ago. These are my kids in this video, and I have their permission to show you this. So go ahead, roll it. All right. So for helping out with the service today, I have a treat for you guys, but there are 2 different treats. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah, you okay with that?
Yeah.
All right, Mia, for you, I have 2. Actually, let's make it 3, 4 Oreos. Just for helping out. Cool?
My own treat.
Logan, yours is a little different. Is that okay? All right, you got 3 Oreos inside an Oreo sundae. I thought you were happy with your Oreos. There's a reason why I'm not teaching the parenting class on Wednesday nights. Comparison. Comparison takes you from here to here, like that. It takes you from, we can say comparison takes you from just right to not enough. Some people have said that the comparison is the thief of joy. It sucks the satisfaction out of every situation. I mean, think about it. Nothing about my daughter's situation changed at all. Just her awareness of what was going on around her. And so before we go any further, my question is, like, for you, if we do a little soul searching, what is it that takes you from just right to not enough? Maybe your living situation, maybe your home was just right, just fine, until you saw someone else's. Now it's not enough. Maybe the way that you parent your kids was just right, or could be just right, but instead it feels like not enough. Maybe your income has the potential to be just right, but instead it's not enough. Maybe your idea of marriage could be just right, but instead we're living in not enough. Comparison really can affect any and every area of life. And if we're not aware of what it's doing, it can totally poison the way we see our lives, our situations, even who we are. It's something that we have to be aware of. Comparison is exhausting. It's not only something that ruins your life situation and enjoyment of it, but it can be exhausting. There's a guy, his name was Solomon. Solomon was the son of a king named David. This is David as in David and Goliath, the giant killer, right? David grows up, has a child. His name's Solomon. Solomon becomes wildly powerful, successful. He is the guy you don't compare yourself to because he's just winning in every category. He's smarter than everyone else. He's got more money. He has more women. He has more power. He has everything he can ever dream of. And he comes to the end of his life and he just kind of sits and like looks. And I don't know if this is how it actually happened, but I picture him like on a rocking chair on his porch, you know, just kind of overlooking how everyone else is living life. And he's got some thoughts about it. We call this the book of Ecclesiastes, right? He's looking at what's going on. Here's what he says, okay? This is from the words of a wise old man. He says, I saw that all toil and all achievement, this is coming from the guy who's at the top. He says, all of it spring from one person's envy of another. Of one person seeing what someone else has and deciding that's where I need to be. That's what my life needs to look like. That's what I want my world to be like. And he says, this too is meaningless. It's a chasing after the wind. If you don't understand what he means by that expression, today, after the service, go outside and chase the wind. You're not gonna catch it. It's exhausting. And what he's saying is like, there is so much that happens in life. Like, this is one of those things easy to just read, breeze over, and cruise on to the next one. He's saying there's so much that happens in life that is simply people competing with one another. One person's dissatisfaction competing with someone else's. This guy wants what that guy has, who wants what that girl has, who wants what this one has, and it just keeps going and going and going and going. And he's saying it's chasing after the wind. No one actually gets to the point where they're like, well, I have it now. Like, I arrived. Why? Because there's always someone in front of you in line. It's exhausting. Is it possible? Is it possible? And maybe you can't wrap your mind around like all toil and achievement. Fine. So let's say some for you. Is it possible that there is an area of your life where comparison has taken the wheel? Like, maybe you have these ideas of what your marriage is supposed to look like that you got from a comparison. Maybe you have some kind of idea of what success looks like. That's simply something you're getting from a comparison with someone else. Maybe you have some kind of idea of what your kids are supposed to look like because of the other kids on your block. And so we toil and strive and push and strain relationships and put expectations on one another and work until we feel like we're at least progressing toward that comparison, only to find out when we get there, there's someone right after them. Well, maybe we're not there, but now we're not here either. Is it possible that there's something in your life, that there's an area of life where comparison has taken the wheel? You know, the issue with comparison, one of the issues, a few of the issues, they're inaccurate and they're not realistic. It's not just like bad news that's true. It's a distorted picture of what reality is actually like. You know, there used to be a time where you were tempted to compare yourself to the other people in your circle, right? Where you work, where you go to school, where your friends are, your block, your mom group, PTA, whatever. But it was a circle. It was a limited circle. Now, you have an infinite feed on whatever social media platform you choose. Everybody is a small fish in a big pond. And I'm not saying social media is bad, but we have to be aware of the fact that we tend to compare. We have a tendency to compare. And those comparisons, they're inaccurate. You know, it is not good. It is not good to wake up first thing in the morning, open up your phone, look at the top of your feed. You know, you're gonna see someone who's looking great and doing great. You know, and you don't know that they took 87,000 pictures before they got that one with the lighting hitting them just perfect so that they don't have a double chin and their hair's gently blowing in the wind and their kids are happy to be there and perfectly smiling. Like, it just looks great. And you're sitting there like with crust in your eyes and dried up drool on your mouth and just feeling pathetic because you compare your behind the scenes to their highlight reel. It's inaccurate. And if we're not aware, if we're not constantly checking ourselves, it will ruin your ability to enjoy what you've been given, what's right in front of you. I heard someone this week explain it like a bookshelf. You know, like, everybody's life is a bookshelf filled with books, different areas of life. You got your marriage book, you got your work book, you've got your parenting book if you're a parent, you've got your job book if you've got a job, you got your dreams, you've got your health, you've got your friendships, different areas of life. And in some of those books, we're doing better than others, right? But what we tend to do with comparison is look at other people's bookshelves and we compare our lives to their best books. Like, I want my marriage to look like his. I want to be in the kind of shape she's in. I want my financial situation to be like that. But we almost never want someone's entire bookshelf. It's a game that it's not fair. It's out of balance. There's a documentary on Netflix. It's called The Last Dance. Michael Jordan. It's fantastic. You should watch it. But there's a scene toward the end of the documentary. He's in a hotel room. It's toward the end of his career. There's a song that got really popular. It's called Be Like Mike, or something like that, right? It's from a Gatorade commercial, and the lyrics are just literally, I want to be like Mike. And so that became a thing, Michael Jordan. He's in his hotel room, just like burnt out, buried under the pressure of what his life has become. He literally can't leave without being swarmed. He's got all of these issues that his fame has created. And he looks right at the cameraman and says, you don't want to be like Mike. We want one book off his shelf, not the rest of them. You might want her marriage, maybe you don't want her childhood. You might want his job, but maybe you don't want his home life. Comparison it's a losing game. You can't win. You can't win the comparison game. So what do? Well, this is what kind of makes comparison tricky. You can't not compare. Comparison is foundational to the way we as human beings process information. It's automatic. Social psychologists say it's more like comparison happens to us or at us because we can't avoid it. If I give you 5 of something and I give the person next to you 4, you don't have to tell yourself to know that you have more than them. It just, you pick up on it immediately. So we can't just stop. It's not that simple. The answer is also not to compare in the other direction. Right? Like a lot of times, really well-intentioned people, and I've done this too, we see someone comparing and they'll say, I want to be like that. And you know what we'll say? Well, you might not be like that, but at least you're not like that. And really what we're doing is feeding the system. We're encouraging more comparison. And so what do we do then? The answer is really to understand why you're comparing. That's what makes the difference between whether or not comparison is healthy and natural or totally detrimental. If you are comparing in search of validation, if you're comparing as a way to mitigate shame, that feeling of not measuring up, if you're comparing to find a sense of worth and value, that's where comparison will always lead you to an unhealthy place. In other words, you're not just simply comparing what you have. You're comparing what you have and what that says about who you are. And so when we use comparison as a way to deal with our shame, it leads us to ugly places. The way to deal with comparison is in dealing with the shame at the source. And this is where, if you're not a person of faith, this is kind of as far as I can take you. But there is a real answer in what we call the gospel or the good news. The Apostle Paul, he said it like this. He was talking about contentment, okay? And this guy is writing from a prison. He's got nothing to his name. He may have days left in his life. We don't know, but his situation, it stinks. And here's what he says. He says, I have learned to be content. Whatever the circumstances, he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content. There's a secret. In any and every situation. In case you missed what he's saying, he's going to explain it again. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. He says these words, right? Ready? He says, I can do all this through him, talking about Jesus, who gives me strength. Now, this is a pretty popular verse, Philippians 4:13. It's a great verse. It's motivating. It's fantastic. A lot of times you'll hear people say, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And in principle, that is true, right? Like God can empower us to do things that we under other circumstances could not. However, that's really not what's going on here. What he's saying is I'm able to find that deep source of contentment in who Jesus is to me. At the core of what we believe, when it comes to God and Jesus and the church, faith, we believe that our ultimate source of acceptance and validation is in Jesus because of what he's done for us. He sees us as we are, where we are, with our brokenness, issues, doubts, problems, hesitations to believe, all of whatever the issues are, and he embraces us fully and completely in a way that we cannot change. And I know if you haven't heard that can seem like distant and abstract, and what does that mean to me? But the more that sinks in over time, the like quieter and quieter the screaming voice of I am not enough gets. And the more we digest that, the more we start to find a sense of sufficiency. And the craving, the need, the drive, the instinct to measure me against him and against her and against what he's making and how she looks and what this situation looks like, it starts to quiet if we're doing it for a sense of validation and satisfaction, to feel like we're enough. But if we're doing it to find purpose, like meaning, worth, to silence shame, comparison leads us to unhealthy places. It leads us to envy, to me wanting what you have because of what it will say about what I'm worth. I want to make what you make so that I'll feel like I'm worth something. And it stops me from being able to appreciate your genuine victories in life. It leads us to places of resentment, to places none of us want to go or be. But comparison, if it's not being done from shame, it can be a healthy thing. It's unavoidable. Like I said, there have been 2 times in my life where I went to other countries, like poverty-stricken countries. And one of those places I was working with orphans who had no parents. They were living in an orphanage. Their future was uncertain. They had very little. And I noticed immediately there were 2 comparisons I made. Naturally, no one had to tell me to do this. I looked at them and I saw they have so much less than I do, and yet they are so much more happy than I am. And in that, comparison can lead you to a place of admiration. When you see someone who's a little further than you or has gotten something a little better than you have, and you're not looking at them as a source of validation, that leads to admiration, which leads to inspiration, which actually makes us want to change for the better. Or if you look at someone who has less than you, but you're not doing it so that you feel superior, like I looked at those children who had less than me, I went home in a state of appreciation. Because I went home appreciating what I have. When done from a healthy place, comparison can lead us to admiration and appreciation. But if we're doing it to find to what some people would say, like, to fill a gap, a hole, a place of validation that really only God can completely and permanently fill. It leads us to doing unhealthy things. Unhealthy things. And so, where is it for you? Where do you find yourself comparing? Where are there comparisons that hurt? That are like hard to swallow? That usually is a pretty good indicator that it's a comparison being done for a sense of validation. You know, I heard during COVID, during the shutdown, when nobody could go out and no one could do anything. Of course, it was like really horrible things happening during that whole time period. But for a lot of parents, that was a season of tranquility, aside from homeschool, which was like torture. But all of a sudden, for a little while, no one was comparing themselves to other parents who were out taking their kids to this thing and that thing and signing up for this book fair and festival and activity and haunted house. Like they were just gone. No one was doing anything. And there was a sense like, there's no one and nothing to compare myself to. And the shame just like kind of silenced for a little bit. What if that was the kind of peace we could live with? That really will come from understanding that our validation needs to come from the giver. What Paul would say is that like satisfaction with what you've been given comes from a relationship with the giver. So I'm going to ask the band to come up, but here's the picture this week that I want to leave you with. Brené Brown, she wrote a book called Atlas of the Heart. It's a new book. She just released it. I think she gives language to emotions better than anyone else I've ever read. She talks a lot about comparison. And she kind of sets up this picture. For her, she said she loves to swim. It's like the perfect thing for her because it's exercise, it's quiet, it's meditative. She's just in her own world, she says, with that black line at the bottom of the pool. She swims. It's great. Unless someone dives in right next to her. And she hears and sees the person swimming alongside her. She said then all of a sudden comparison enters the picture. And what was at one point a place of peace, contentment, tranquility, has now been polluted by comparison because she's competing with the person next to her. She's comparing how fast they're going to how fast she's going. She said one time she even got hurt, threw out her shoulder because she was trying to race somebody who was not racing her, but in better shape. Whatever your situation right now, whether you're married or single, working or not, content with all the boxes that have been checked or struggling with the ones that haven't been checked, I believe that God has given you a lane to swim in, to enjoy. And so swim. Swim. Be aware of when you're comparing and know why. And really do the hard work of searching the heart and understanding. Am I doing this for validation? What is Jesus, God, this whole thing? What does that mean for how I understand myself? And as we wrestle with those hard questions to see how those actually affect the way that we live, I think you'll see there'll be a sense of enjoyment that will come back to swimming in your lane, even when someone's swimming on your right and on your left.